Okay, welcome to week number 4 of the From Linear to Circular program. Really great to have you with us here for the 4th week in a row. My name is, in case you haven't attended the other 3 weeks, but as a reminder, if you have, my name is Seb, and I'm a part of the learning team here at the MacArthur Foundation. Apparently my colleague Ilma, who's appearing currently as a nice name on the screen, is having trouble revealing herself to us, but she is here with me once again, co-hosting the session.
Yes, I think I need the host to enable my video sharing, and then I'll appear on the screen as well.
Okay, that's me, Ilma.
Thank you, Seb, for not allowing me to appear then.
A couple of people have noticed the wall behind me still hasn't been painted. You should be able to share video now, Ilma. But yeah, so the wall behind me may not get painted throughout the 10 weeks. And I'm also being reminded by the excellent team of people that we have working behind the scenes on this project that in order for everyone to see your comments in the chat window, you have to make sure you've clicked to all panelists and attendees. It's a tricky one because it's automatically set to all panelists, but all that means, unfortunately, is that everyone else who's attending this webinar, with counting up into the high hundreds now, will not get to see your comments, your reflections, or your personal stories as the session progresses. So make sure you've ticked that option.
Yes, and as Seb said, this is the 4th webinar in the series, and we have an amazing guest I'm really excited about today. But before we go into the content bit, there are a couple of things that we need to show. And Seb, I need to be able to share the slides. I think you have too much power today.
Anyone would think that we hadn't done this for 3 weeks in a row.
I know. So, a few important things just to remind you, all the important information that you need to know in order to get the most out of this course is on Slack, and you can see the link to the Slack community on your screen. If you haven't joined yet after these 4 weeks, please do. It's really worth getting stuck in there. There are some amazing discussions happening. And we also have a LinkedIn community that you can join as well. And another piece of important announcement that I have is regarding the double webinars. So as you know, we had 2 weeks where you had to choose one of 2 topics, but luckily under the popular demand, we decided to give you the 4 options. So you can join all 4 webinars, and now we have confirmed dates for all of them. So next week, on Wednesday, during the regular time, we will have plastics webinar, and you can use the link that you already have. And on Friday, at the same time, we will have cities webinar, and the link will be shared by email, Slack, LinkedIn, and all the usual communication channels. And then the week after, regular time, we will have fashion, and you have the link already. And food will be on Friday at the same time. And again, the link will be shared with you during that week.
Basically, there's loads of amazing content coming up over the next few weeks, and it's coming from the people who are behind, who are very much in these projects. So it's coming from our best people on some of our latest content.
Yes, and they will be joined us in these webinars as well. And also just to say, you may know that you had 2 pieces of homework, and I just wanted to make a quick comment about the product and business models, and to say that it's been great to see some of the discussions that were happening on the Slack channel, and the variety of objects you picked, from yachts to furniture to T-shirts to guitars. And I think the most popular one was the facial mask, the face masks. So relevant in the situation today. So we will not be commenting on that, but you're very welcome to go back and add your example or continue the discussions there.
Especially great to see people adding their own comments, joining the conversations, pointing out things in people's sort of system maps to kind of engage with. It's my personal life goal never to be considered an expert on anything. And I think the spirit of this program is definitely that we're learning together and working together and figuring things out together. So very positive to see all of that collaboration going on in that Slack space. Now, the one thing about this program is that sometimes I have to talk about admin, and it's not, I never really wanted to be in this kind of role.
You know that.
But we do have a couple of quick rules about trying to make the most of Zoom and this window and this moment in time. So we've already pointed out the chat function. Make sure you've ticked to all panelists and attendees and not just panelists. There's the Q&A function as well, which is where questions should go in. So chat is for general comments and chit chat and telling us, and Q&A is to post your questions. We'll try and get to or group as many of those as possible to pose to our guest during the session. And then we'll try and respond to some afterwards as well, if we can. Please post only webinar or the content of this webinar related questions in the Q&A function. We have lots of webinars coming up on different topics. So you know, you'll have a chance to ask people about those, but also program related questions. Try and use the Get Info channel on Slack. So with that out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker in this webinar. I've had the pleasure and fortune to work with Ken Webster for several years when he was head of innovation here at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. He's really a true source of inspiration for many of the things that we talk about on this program, and for the direction of the foundation's work. Of course, author of a book that I know many of you are familiar with because we've seen you sharing it in various versions, Circular Economy, A Wealth of Flows. And it's a great time also having done 3 kind of introductory is maybe a bit soft for what they were, but for getting some of the really core ideas of a circular economy and practical implications of circular economy out to take it up a level, and introduce Ken. So welcome, Ken, to the Open for All from Linear to Circular program as our attendee count closes in on the 1,000 mark once again, which is fantastic.
Hi there, Seb and everyone.
So Ilma, we did, there was one other piece of the homework.
Yes. And before I get into homework, I just want to say that I think this is one of my sad, not regrets, because it was out of my control, but the week I joined the foundation was the week when we had Ken's goodbye party. So I never got to work with Ken. And
well, he stayed close to us as evidenced by being here.
So Ken, to kick off the discussion with you today, we thought we will bring in the homework that we had, and we had another question, and I'm going to share some of the answers to that question. And we basically asked people what is not circular economy. And I would like to pick up some of the more interesting answers to that.
We were asking you to use a program called Pixteller, which I've never used before, but it allows you to make quite cool posters quite nimbly. So I hope you enjoyed playing with Pixteller.
So maybe I'll just briefly run through, and then you'll be able to comment on that. So one of the answers was that circular economy is not less economic growth. So what is the relationship between circular economy and economic growth?
You have to be.
Yeah.
Do you want me to do that one first?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, one of the issues around all of this is if you're going to change the economy, you're probably going to change somewhat how you measure economic growth. So circular economy can certainly contribute to increased well-being. It can increase the stock of solutions available to the populace. But if you're trying to slow and change the flow of materials, even if you don't change them, you're going to make sure that they are more reusable, refurbished, and whatever. Some of the technical definitions of economic growth might edge downwards with that sort of approach. So yes, it's pro-growth, but you have to really think through as well what it is you mean by growth. Yes, it helps people get better off, but you can't just bolt it on and change nothing else. There is that obligation. So yes and no.
It might be growth, but not as you know it.
Growth, but not as you know it. Yes, it's. I remember that song, several.
So another poster is about overconsumption, and when I was looking at it, I was thinking about one of the things we mentioned when we referenced circular economy and nature, and the fact that nature is abundant, and yet for me, there's no really overconsumption.
Well, you should try putting some bacteria in a petri dish. They'll eat everything. Full of a petri dish full of agar, they'll eat everything and then die off. So it all depends on where your limits are and how those are approached, whether it's approached creatively. Now, overconsumption shouldn't really matter if everything is designed to be, on a waste is food principle. But you know, you've got to watch that. There are absolute limits. You can't just cycle things faster and faster and faster. You'll find that that would probably break down the systems that support it. But in general, consumption isn't a problem in nature because everything is food for something else. You know, the wastes are food for something else. If you want to kill yourself with drinking or whatever, well, you can overconsume personally, and you're finished. It's up to you. So again, it's a yes and no thing. But in general, consumption doesn't matter if it's within, if it fits the system, because it adds food to the system. So in generally, I think we're going to avoid the guilt thing. There's a lot of guilt stuff around some of the concepts people use, that it's all about, oh, we're terribly guilty, we've consumed too much. Well, what do you mean too much? I mean, the weight of ants and termites in the world is something hugely larger than the human population, and nobody says there are too many ants. Well, unless of course they live in your kitchen. But there aren't too many ants. They contribute to the working of the whole system. And so you've got to be careful about when you say consumption of what, and how is it designed, and what happens next.
And then the third poster we wanted your comment on is regarding the Kuznets curve.
Oh yeah, well, somebody's been reading their textbooks. The Kuznets curve is he was the guy who developed GDP, by the way. And he said, don't use it to compare countries. So
that's gone well.
That's gone well. That went well for him.
Good advice.
Yeah. And he also said that economic growth would make things worse for a while, but continuing economic growth would allow you to clean up afterwards. It's a rather convenient idea, shall we put it that way? And it's in the textbooks, but then a lot of slightly dodgy stuff is. So no, not really. Not really. So Kuznets curve doesn't tell you it's circular economy, no.
Yeah.
So nice try.
And the final piece, I think it was my favorite, so no comment really, but circular economy, it's not a movie, it's a reality, and it's coming to the industry next to you.
Yeah, I hope they've got a job in the movies, because that works quite well. It is a reality of how the overall system works. So you can resist it for so long, but yes, it is a reality, and it's coming to a place near you. The interesting thing is to make sure it becomes an economic opportunity. You know, it's not, oh my goodness, they destroyed the world. It's, yeah, let's look forward to this because we could do it better.
Good stuff. So thank you very much to everyone who submitted their ideas to that. And if you're watching this and you didn't contribute, or you didn't see them all, they are of course all in the week 3 Slack channel. So go to the week 3 Slack channel. You can see a whole variety of posters and designs. But Ken, so last week when I finished the session, I teased this one by saying that we were going to hear about a circular economy sandwich.
Yes.
What did I mean by circular economy sandwich?
Well, let's find out. A sandwich, in England at least, or other places, is a piece of bread on the top, a piece of bread on the bottom, and something in between. So I think if we get into this, we will soon discover the sandwich. So we just go back one. I want to just, because I'm not running the slides. This is me, basically. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Exeter Business School at the moment. I'm still an EMF associate, which I'm very proud to be. And on the right of that slide is a reminder that there is an online conference around circular economy, particularly aimed at academics or people who research, or people who want to add to discussion on the boundaries of circular economy. Okay, that's my advertising. Next slide, please. Okay, now this is how I described it in a book, and I don't think they published this. I can't remember now. I think there might have been a worry about, because it says something about money. But let's go into this just very briefly, because it's a nice way of saying that everything is different. And I think we've appreciated that from a material point of view so far. But if you like, 2 things drive growth. One is cheap energy and technology together, and the other one is money as debt. Now that's something that comes up again and again. Money as debt brings forward production. And so you can accelerate production by introducing more debt, and we see that quite a lot. On the other side, we've got the typical cycles we get in circular economy, the split between the two, but nobody's really figured out what to do with the money question. Can you just leave it as it is, or do you have to also change that? Excuse me. And the reason I mention that particularly is some people really want to pretend that the circular economy is just about materials and energy, but actually the economy is so interdependent, you have to be able to say something about money at some stage and the role of money as debt and credit creation in there. You'll notice that, of course, the linear ones are powered by fossil fuels, and ideally the other ones by renewables. But don't forget, that's always a throughput. Some people say, how can you make energy circular? Well, you can't. Nobody's ever pretended you could.
That's a good answer, Ken. You can't.
Can't do. Well, you can't. It's the second law of thermodynamics. What can I say? Right, next one, please. Now we're going to look at the sandwich. The first part of the sandwich for me is the top layer, and that's around systems thinking. It's the way you think about the world. And these are always based on scientific worldviews. We tended to have one that suited the linear economy, which was the world as machine. Well, now we understand the world is full of complex adaptive systems. It's feedback rich, it's interdependent. Now that's the reality of the world as it works. You can't just say, I don't want to look at it that way. What are you? I mean, you know, well, I suppose some people think the world is flat. You also get those people. And some people think the coronavirus is a hoax. So I'm not really going to go into that, but the way scientists see the world is a complex adaptive system full of feedback, and that should relate to how we teach and learn. Next one, please. Just
on the worldview question, yeah. Ken, where does the current worldview come from? It's obviously something that we can change, or at least you're suggesting we can change, but it obviously frames the way we see everything.
Yeah, the framing is crucial. Now, all framing, we're told, George Lakoff, are based on metaphors. You know, is something as this? You know, we have the idea that argument is war. In the English language, arguments are always described in terms of war. I outflanked her. I withdrew that one. I did a quick maneuver. And to looking at a bigger level, we, as I said, we used to use the idea that the world is a machine. It's a machine of parts. It's deterministic. It's almost like understand, predict, and control. We still see lots of that, as though the world was a machine that you could control. Now, that's just an approximation. Real world systems are full of feedback. And you can see patterns, you can see change, but you can't determine it. We are not in charge. Does that help a little bit?
Yes,
because now we have a more biological and ecological route to these things.
They're not simple sums. They're
not simple sums. And so people expecting it to be a simple solution, yeah, a lot of people will tell you that, but it's not. It needs nuancing and reflection. Oh, middle of the one, this is what most people, I imagine, so far in this course have been looking at, and quite right too. They've been looking at how to produce and what impacts it's got on consumption, business models, product service systems, things like that. That's all very fine, but my input today is not going to look at that in particular. It's going to look at the top of the sandwich and the bottom. Next one. Enabling conditions. The one thing we know about systems is they iterate, they're full of feedback. And so you set the rules of the game. It's a bit like football. Or soccer, same thing. You understand the rules and you get immense variety, even though the rules are pretty simple. You get a lot of creativity, you get a lot of interest in it. And what we might say are the rules of the game for the relationships between the different players. It might be ICT, which is communications technology and information technology. It might be the rules of the game with taxes. It might be regulation. But you can't do a circular economy and just say, well, you can leave everything else the same. That's just means you've denied that it's a complex adaptive system. You know, it's a bit like, really? You know,
and it's fair to say that those rules are currently rigged for the throughput model that you were shown.
They're highly conducive to a linear model. Yeah, I wouldn't say that. You can say it's rigged, but I would just say they suit the way we used to do things. So if we want to do things differently, we probably have to change some of those in line with the overall idea of moving towards a more feedback-rich circular system.
And the goal of that game would be growth or the higher profit?
Well, profit's really about what a business does, but yes, we want businesses to be profitable, and it would lead to growth, but again, with the caveat I put on exactly what you're growing. If you're growing if you, for instance, were regenerating soils, you might get more output from those soils. You might get more variety from those soils. You might get more profit per hectare. You see, that would be legitimate, but overall, it's just not growth for growth's sake. It's growth which rebuilds capitals and enables the thing to continue. Okay, next please. Oh, the typical diagram, you had that 1,000 times, but I wanted to look at, it's very different how people tend to look at both sides. I think I'll illuminate this by looking at what Walter Stahel said, so you're familiar enough with that. But keep an eye on how the two material cycles are fundamentally different. Too many people think that they're very much the same, in a sense that disorder increases over time and then you can just recover it. The big difference is on the bio side, you've got huge amounts of materials which are built from simple building blocks generally, and they all can be decomposed and reconstructed by living systems. On the right-hand side, you've got none of that. If we don't do it, nobody does it. And if it does get into the living systems, it's a contaminant. So it's fundamentally different characteristics to these materials. Okay.
I suppose that's the trap of the diagram in some ways, is that you can almost think they're two pieces of the same jigsaw, which I guess they are in one sense, but
yeah, but they're very different pieces. And it's not just because one's in green and one's in another color. I have to say another color because I don't know what color that is. I'm a bit colorblind. I think it's blue.
I think it's blue, yes.
Blue. Okay.
We have had a question in, Ken, that relates to the sandwich, which is, why a sandwich?
Because didn't your mother, whoever cared for you, say that you shouldn't pull the middle out of a sandwich, you should eat the whole thing? It's basically that sort of notion that that's what's presented, and you don't then begin to deconstruct it and throw away the bits of the meal, unless you're about 6 years old, of course, or you've suddenly discovered that you're in a restaurant and this is not gluten-free bread. It's a meal.
Three important parts, yes.
Yes, it's a meal. They're all these. If you bought a sandwich, that's what you get in English-speaking world. You get that sandwich, and it's bad. It's impolite to throw away the bits you don't want. And
I guess it's just use of metaphor.
It's a metaphor. That's all. Do you want the whole sandwich? And the answer should be yes, I do, because that's what I bought.
I want the whole sandwich, not just.
I want the whole. I want the whole sandwich. You can tell. You know, no messing around. Next, please. Right, we'll have a look at the lungs. Not only are the materials very, very different in characteristics, any system looks more like this. Now, the characteristics of this system are that it's effective. We'll come to this in a bit later. But effective systems always have efficient parts with the big flows and a few connections, and they have the more resilient parts, which is where most of the exchange happens. So real systems, not only are they complex adaptive, they have two characteristics, all of them do, which is an interplay between the efficiency and resilience. Now, when somebody says, I want an efficient system, Bill McDonough illustrated that once by saying, so should I hit the piano keyboard with a lump of wood? I mean, I get all the notes hit at once. You know, it does the job. Hey, it's done. You know, but no, we know that's not the point. We know that's ridiculous. Efficiency has no meaning, right? It's just a relationship between in and out. Effective systems beg the question, effective at doing what? And anybody who thinks that efficient systems are sufficient in themselves clearly doesn't understand what that does to a system. Efficiency makes systems brittle. I point to COVID-19, when the ridiculous situation was, oh, we need some masks, but China's not making any at the moment. What? These are just masks for the face. Do you mean the fifth largest, the richest country in the world, UK, can't make enough masks? What are you talking about? But that's what you get when you think about efficiency only. You make the system brittle. And it took just a couple of weeks of the pandemic to reveal how pretty dumb that is. And for those who like to be a bit techie, on the right-hand side, there's what determines whether it's efficient or resilient, and it's the number of nodes and connections. Efficiency has low numbers, and resilience demands high numbers because it can take damage. If I block my trachea, it's game over, goodbye Vienna. If I get some damage to part of the lung, well, the lung can work around it. And that's really what we need to understand, is we need resilience in systems. Next slide, please. This is another way of putting the same thing. And it is important, we'll get to this, because it means different policies. This diagram on the left is from Bernard Lietaer and Sally Gerner. I use it quite a lot. It tries to illustrate this difference between brittleness and resilience. And at the top, the interplay, if it's done right, you get a window viability. They call it real life sustainable ecosystems. Now I put a little box around half of that diagram for two reasons. One, it's not discussed enough in circular economy, because this tends to be the very small businesses, the little bits of exchange that happen everywhere. It's not very interesting if you're interested in very large accumulated profits. There's not enough flow through. The computer modeling in the middle is just a typical fractal, shows the same sort of characteristics, efficient bits and resilient bits, and just a reminder of the lungs thing. On here, it's a cast, but even that doesn't go down to the detail. So the little line I put at the bottom is efficiency must serve effectiveness, but resilience preserves it. So you have to decide whether you want to be effective or merely efficient. If you're just too resilient, by the way, it's about like living in a village that never changes. It's sort of okay, but really, it's just too stagnant, and it will be overtaken by change in the end. Thanks. Next one. Okay, here's my dear friend Walter, with a very steepling effect at the moment. He's going into the phase where he's really just telling you what you need to know. No arguments, please. No, Walter's very, very gentle about this. And what he's talking essentially about the technical cycle, so we'll come into that now, and we'll get back to resilience in a moment. And he's talking about two parts of it. He talks about the era of R, which is, first of all, preserve what you've got. So you want to reuse, repair, and all of that sort of stuff. So that's extended product life, however you want to do it. But he has the era of D too, which is you've got to get back to clean molecules in the end. We haven't done this very well, but he's suggesting that we have total product liability in eventually, which is that firms that produce something will be not just slightly liable, but ultimately liable for bringing it back into the system. You might have to be paid for each use of it, but he says this is inevitable, because if you can't put these molecules into the living systems, what are you going to do? You have to get them back as pure as new resources, he says. So that's two stages of this in the technical cycle. Make sure the product life is extended, whatever business models you want to use. But in the end, somehow we have to capture the valuable molecules. Now, some people say, well, plastic's not a valuable molecule. Exactly. Very often it isn't. So maybe it's just the wrong material for that job. If there's mountains of it, it isn't worth anything. You know it's always going to leak. You know there's going to be not full capture of it. It probably says the design is wrong. And I think Walter would probably agree with that. Some stuff shouldn't be in the technical cycle because you cannot guarantee to capture it all. And everything that leaks in an iterative system soon builds up. Next slide, please.
Just on that era of D point, can we are? I mean, it's quite technical, I suppose, but that's what we're here for. It's this notion that actually, even when we look at those loops on the butterfly diagram, you don't, you don't, it's like they say you can't unscramble an omelette. You're not really unscrambling the omelette, and somehow you need to get back to what you had at the start. So depolarize, for example, and that's what he talks about.
Yeah, but that it takes very good design to do that at a profit. You see, this is part of the element of this. These companies would want their materials back because they've got extended use to start with, and they know how it will be deconstructed because they got valuable molecules there that they want. That's the trick, because Walter's very keen all the time to say that circular economy is an economic opportunity driven by innovation. So you have to think through how you're doing things, and spending your entire life trying to make an impossible packaging product come back circular, or waiting for a techno fix. Oh, they've got an enzyme to dissolve plastic. Oh, rinky dink, fine, great. But it looks like a very odd way of doing it compared to saying, actually, what sort of packaging would we either be able to recover intact and use again and again, or can we just put it into the living systems and it decomposes it?
So the emphasis should be on design rather than waiting for the right technologies to emerge.
Well, that's part of that techno myth that we've got, is that we can do anything you like and somebody will figure out how to fix it in the end. And well, I think there's a lesson from COVID-19 in that. Oh, we don't have to worry about diseases. We can always fix it in the end. Yeah, sure we can. But the question is, what's the cost in the meanwhile compared to, designing how we interact with animals and all the rest of it in a rather different way? We could be a lot better about that. I'm not prejudging the eventual discussion about COVID. Next, please. Right, so in Walter's world, what went wrong? Not in Walter's world, but what happened in the world of technical materials? And I always say that it's scale and sale. Now, what we managed to do was make things a lot more cheaply by having large scale, so we had high fixed costs, but the cost of producing each unit was very low. This enabled lots of stuff to be made. So you could have more capital because you could add more machinery, and that means, and you get lower cost of production. But then you just created yourself a huge problem, because even by the time it was the 1920s or 30s in America, North America, USA, there was overproduction. They were thinking, my God, we can't sell all this stuff. How do we sell it? They've got a car, because their habit at that time was, or maybe you've saved up and you've got a little Model T Ford or something. You don't need anything else. Why would you want something else? I've got a bucket, that's enough.
Simpler times, Ken.
Well, the thing was, they had to try and deal with that because they had invested for a long run through. Henry Ford, if we're mentioning the Model T, he thought, I know, I'll pay the workers more, then they can afford the stuff, which was great. That did work. That was part of the deal, surely, is to make sure your workers got enough money to buy the stuff that's produced. But look what happened on the right-hand side. Sorry, I'm a bit croaky today. You had to do all of these things to cope with your throughput, your scale and sale. You had to market the hell out of it. You perhaps need credit. General Motors at one time was making more from their credit arrangements on the cars than making the cars. Built-in obsolescence, make sure it craps out quite quickly. Oh, always something new. We could transfer the responsibility to the purchaser. Here, you bought it, I don't want to see it again. Environmental impact, well, we're not paying for that. We'd want stable conditions. We want to make sure the politics work so that we can keep selling for the time it takes to pay back the factory. And at all the time, we want to cut the labor out of it because labor is an expense. So just by deciding we're going to go efficient and selling, you build many of these problems straight in, because the alternative is what? If you've got this scale and sale, because once you've filled the market, you've got to keep filling it. And you might sell it abroad, or you might sell it twice, 3 times. But what if, and sorry, yeah.
I was going to say, this picture does make me think about the fallacy of the sort of overconsumption that we were talking at the beginning, where there's sort of guilt on people, when in fact, if people stop consuming, what happens to the whole system? Well,
it falls apart. They can't have them buying less because the system's built to deliver cheap stuff all the time. And quite right, because that makes money for a lot of people in the chain. But the point is, you get to overproduction very rapidly. So it's not overconsumption necessarily. You have to put the blame on people to say, well, they've consumed too much. Well, the system won't work if they don't consume too much. So what's the answer to that? Next slide. And you've seen this sort of thing. So you don't sell products, because most of the real products, I'm not talking about a piece of Lego or a little something made a long way away. You know, I'm trying to find something on my desk, you know. I'm not really worrying about combs or something. But durables, this whole thing about, well, if we have lower fixed costs, because we can just start off making it, we'd have to have high variable costs, which means each unit costs a lot. But that doesn't matter if you can sell access again and again. So you have high utilization of the object. IT can come in here. So you can sell access again and again and again, tailored to what the user wants. That's why startup firms like River Simple, the car firm in the UK, is not going to sell a car ever. It will be like having a mobile phone. It's a subscription. And you see subscription things increasing in amount. And this means that because they've got extended product life, they can get the extra costs, they can cover those with the income that you get. So, and the big beauty of this is that now information technology, ICT, you know what's happening to that object. You know when it needs maintenance. You know when you need to get it back. And you don't even have to buy the components for that. River Simple experimenting with doing a service deal with the component manufacturers. So this is, in a way, his ideal, is that you invest in lowering the cost of service and spread that build cost over many more users by making sure it's just what they need at the right time. Now, it's not easy, but the point is, this doesn't get you overconsumption. You know, say you really do want to run your washing machine 5 times a day, let's just make it up. That's not such a big problem, because you've got a washing machine that will take the extra work and you just pay for the service that you want. You don't have to pay for the machine and wear it out. So that's the alternative, is to move from products to services for decent, durable things. We're not talking about you.
And there's a question coming in. So would you say that circular economy could be better reached if consumption is need-based and on demand?
You can't decide what need-based means. I mean, I can as an economist, but in general, you can't start deciding whether somebody needs it.
But like the example with the T-Mill factory, which produces T-shirts only on demand, only when they receive.
Oh yeah, that's great. That's great, because when you don't overstock, in other words, you make it to what the customer needs and wants at that time. I put needs in there, but I've also added wants. That helps a lot, because so much clothing is overproduced straight away. That's a good one. We'll make things to fit people and against their choices, not flood the market with some things we might guess they want. So it's got big implications, that one, that print-on-demand T-shirts, because it will really undermine production in Southeast Asia. But then the question might be, so? That's what the business person might say. So I can get a better return with T-shirts on demand, and I can recover the cloth even and carry on. So there are big implications all around. Next slide, please. Full disclosure, I'm on the supervisory body for the Madasta Foundation in Holland. But they're part of this thing about knowing exactly what we've got in terms of materials. They build databases around buildings, construction, infrastructure. And the idea is, going back, I wrote it at the bottom, total product liability. So in the end, we know where all the valuable material is, what it's worth. And so when we say deconstruct buildings, oh, we know what we've got there. And this is part of that eventual move to a system where materials do properly circulate. And it's quite a big change, but this data is creeping into everything. So the other element that I keep saying, Walter says, total product liability is going to be needed for people who manufacture to properly take care of what they do, because they will have to act as if they continually own it. Now, that means it needs to be tracked, and they probably need to be paid a fee, because in the end, they're the ones who are liable to bring it back in the system. Anyway, UCL are working on that. Walter's working on it. Interesting. Way off. Next one. Yeah, the new Triodos Bank is very beautiful in terms of materials, and that was done by the architect, I think, the one behind the Madasta Foundation, Thomas Rao. Okay, so you've done the technical side. What about the other side? This is open loops, open materials. It doesn't have to be all controlled. Nature doesn't work with a closed loop pipe. You might have seen Kate Raworth with her tubular pipes. Nature doesn't work that way. It is generous. It feeds the forest, not just the trees. That's not a revelation. That's just so obvious. So what it means is you have to design whatever it is to fit the system. And the system is one where it can be degraded through living systems. That's what the biocide cycle is. Materium are a good one, looking at easily sourceable substitute materials in the biosense. So this also ties in with the idea that you add value with what you've got. You know, a chap who works with Gunter Pauli, I've forgotten his name, Idris Abakan, he says that if you take waste, add knowledge to it, you get an asset, which I quite like. So waste plus knowledge equals an asset. And then if you've got an asset, you've got a business. Next one, please. I'm not spending much time on that because I want to get to the system conditions question. So here's some, put in a sort of, hopefully slightly amusing way, some basic guidelines for a more thoroughgoing circular economy. Don't kill the host. Now, in other words, we depend on the functions of the larger system. We're not in charge, so don't kill the host. In other words, don't kill the planet or try and kill it. You won't kill the planet, but you might commit suicide in the effort. So don't kill the host, so don't try it. Don't kill the customer. Now, we're talking about business and economics. You don't want to kill the customer. It's not very good for revenue, I must say. So don't have toxics. Waste really must be food. And this is this idea that the circular economy isn't a business being circular, it's the system being circular. So we have to be able to say, feed the forest to feed the trees. Everything is a nutrient, therefore the whole thing gets better. So don't kill the customer. Next one is don't kill their custom. Now, businesses need customers and customers need income. If you look after me, I will look after you. And even Adam Smith had that phrase, the great circulation. And that's something we seem to be forgetting at the moment is customers need income. Where are they going to get it from in a highly automated AI fourth industrial revolution sort of way? A large number of truck drivers are not going to become web programmers, as if you needed those anyway.
People just reskill, Ken, is what.
Well, that's what the story is, but that's just so bonkers that you know, it's not needed. If the idea that AI was going to take your job, you should be able to celebrate because you've got something like maybe a basic dividend. You know, your basics are covered anyway. And don't tell me it can't be done. They've just been doing it in many parts of the world now. Have some money. We need you to stay alive and spend some money. So diversity is strength. It's not all about efficiency. We've been into that enough. It's basic systems knowledge. Most systems are fractal. They work at different nested scales. The whole thing has to work. You know, you can't just say, oh, well, we'll replace it with a highly efficient, massive business. No, you'll need small businesses too. And a quote which always gives a reference to Lucy Hardy at the foundation, which originally worked it up with me, is we were taking things from Bill McDonough and so on. It's regenerative, accessible, and abundant by design. It must do all of those things because otherwise it doesn't have a chance to help people at different levels in the system. It's got to be regenerative, rebuild capital, accessible. You know, it's not excluded, It's more about talking about the commons rather than enclosure. And it has to be very productive. And it's all done by design. You know, it's not an accident. The economy isn't a force of nature, it's something we choose. And if Idris Abu Khan is correct, waste plus knowledge equals an asset. And this can be used effectively to build economic growth, given my caveats on that. But you need somewhere some system conditions. And that brings us to the next slide, which should be
this is what you were expecting, Ken. Good.
This is what I was expecting. I was just nervous for a moment, Seb. So usually it's the question how, and this is what I like, you know, people to get particularly into. How do we make sure it's regenerative and restorative? How do we make regenerative and restorative pay? It's got to be an economic advantage. It's not, oh, we'll have a nature reserve. How do we do that? How do we feed the forest? How do we make sure that waste is food? These are all system condition questions. Don't kill the customer. Does COVID-19 tell us anything? I've sort of given a hint about that, about basic dividend, but it's only one approach. What encourages this at all scales to be diverse? You know, when you look at Cradle to Cradle, many people here will have read Cradle to Cradle. The big thing that shows up is that they only have about 3 things to say. They say shift to renewables, okay. Waste is food, yeah. And then they say celebrate diversity. And in all the time working with colleagues at the MacArthur Foundation and elsewhere, that one is almost always ignored. You know, celebrate diversity. Well, yeah, it's nice in an inclusion sense, but what does it mean economically? Usually people go, oh, I don't know what that's about, really. So what is it that would encourage diversity? Why is it important? Circular economy is regenerative, accessible, and abundant. So what infrastructure do they need? What is the role, if you like, of the state or quasi-state-like bodies when it comes to infrastructure? So again, apologies for being a bit croaky today, but can somebody, I mean, there's so much going on in the chat window, I'm assuming colleagues at EMF.
We have got some great questions coming in. I'm just
going to grip on that. So let's see what we can do.
And Ken, just picking up on what you just said about diversity. So how would diversity show up in circular economy?
It's about all of them. Diversity shows up in circular economy because you have lots of different businesses trying different things, if you want to do it in business, or they're using different materials and opportunities. Without diversity, you don't get this creativity. You get things locked in. And in forests, for instance, diversity guarantees that if there's a shock, the thing doesn't totally collapse. So you've got to be able to encourage people to try lots of different things at different scales. Like locally here, the local farm shops have really come into their own. You know, they're organized deliveries and everything, where sometimes you can't get a slot for the supermarket. You know, that's revived it. So this is what diversity means. There are these other opportunists operating in areas which are not necessarily mainstream.
Why do you think it gets overlooked so often then, Ken? What's the topic of diversity?
Why does it get ignored?
Yes.
Well, because a lot of it relates to very small businesses, you know, and proper startups. I don't mean ones that are waiting to be bought by Facebook. I mean things actually trying something really quite different, or social enterprises, for instance, trying different things. They're no interest really to bigger business because you can't scale them. Diversity means, you know, in terms of your own backyard, how much bacteria, how many viruses are in the soil? You can't measure them, trillions, but they're all vital to the whole thing working. But they're generally ignored because, well, it's not very interesting compared to a cat or a dog, you know, even an earthworm.
And I want to show you what people have come up in their answers about the enabling conditions or driving factors for circular economy. But before that, one more question just in terms of social impact and inclusion, and going back to the access versus ownership. What about people in poverty or people who may lose jobs? Like what would happen if they rent everything and suddenly they lose a lot of things that they need in life?
That's a that's a very good question. People always say that when they can't really think what to say immediately. Part of the answer for me is that we use things like the basic dividend to make sure that we do have basic amounts of income coming into everybody, because the economy is extremely productive. There's no need for, because what makes people poor very often is paying rent, unaffordable housing, very low wages. You know, they can make some reasonable decisions if they aren't poor anymore. You follow, of course. So they might want to buy things, that's okay. But I've got this is the difference. You know, I don't imagine this is my bass guitar, right? I don't want to rent that one. That's a sort of heirloom type thing. It's an heirloom type thing. So it's an object that I get a continual joy out of. But a washing machine, I don't collect those. I just want the service of washing.
Yeah.
So there are some goods which are sentimental or important, but most people own functional objects like the phone or whatever. You know, I don't care that that's not mine. You know, it works. That's what I want.
There's the purpose.
We've, I mean, there's been some great questions coming in. We had a couple about jobs, which we've sort of touched on with the sort of universal dividend comments and things like that. And obviously we could have a whole session about jobs. One sort of theme maybe that's come up, which might be worth addressing, is a few people may be asking about traditional solutions like the 3 Rs. What's the role of people in driving change? Any comments on that, Ken?
What, the things on your list here are what you've just said, people driving change? Well, of course people drive change because it's all about people, you know. But it's people with agency, people with choices that they can make. And one of the things, of course, is do they have enough money to make a choice, for example, or do they have access to environments and systems where they can be productive? You know, a lot of people have found a great solace in maker labs or community kitchens. You know, they need access to resources and they need some funds to be able to be productive, partly for themselves and partly because it might be on enterprising. So yeah, people always drive change, but I don't know what that really means. But in a sense, yeah, we want all people to be able to drive change which relates to them. You know, there's a strong democratic impulse in all of this. Can I pick something from this list?
Yes, let's take a look at this stimulus that we've had.
Yeah, tax and incentives. Walter, just going back to him because I think he's pretty good on this. He's been saying for decades, you've got to shift the taxes from people, don't charge them income tax, and don't stop productive businesses, you know, things that produce and exchange, don't tax them, but tax resources, you know, non-renewables. He wants non-renewables to be taxed. And that's a very, very old debate. It's nearly 800 years old between enclosure and the commons, you know, but who has the right to access to certain resources. So the reason is you don't tax labor is you want labor to do more things. They want them to be able to do more things. But you don't want to encourage people to take out fossil fuels or copper or nickel or all the rest of it, surely. And so that's a big one for me. If you don't change something in the tax system, you're just going to keep penalizing labor. Why on earth are you doing that? Nobody can ever answer that other than it's, well, we're already doing it. You know, we tax consumption and people and profits for productive economies. Piketty would say we need to tax capital and wealth. That's not bad. Mindset worldview, yes. Thriving versus growth. Yeah, we want thriving. We can have some growth. Depends what you mean by what is what. Rules of the game, new measurements for GDP. Yes, please. Because otherwise, Ann Pettifor said it this way. GDP is like saying, I will judge the car on the speedometer. That is not a great idea. You know, it's something, but it's like saying, oh, it goes very fast. Yeah, what else does it do? You know?
Do you know metrics that are already out there that could be potentially replaced?
There are lots of metrics. I don't like metrics much, actually. You know why? No, that you say. The reason is that.
Oh, Ten, tell us why.
Tell us why. Thank you, Sam. You can get metrics don't drive, funnily enough, the activity. The activity looks good, and then you know it's in the right direction, and then you check it out with the metrics. You need the metrics in the end. But what's the direction we're going? You know, otherwise it'd be in the original Industrial Revolution. Do you think they all sat round? I've got coal, you've got limestone, I've got some, you know, waterways. And then they asked somebody to do the metrics. They just said, that looks like a great idea. Let's make steel or iron. And then they check out later, how can we do that better? What other things do we need to know? You know, so sometimes metrics is backwards to me. You have to have a sense of where you want to go, and then you do it in the right way with your metrics. But that's a personal view on that one. A lot of people will disagree with that.
I mean, we do come up with that is a really interesting point, because, you know, that there is something safe, isn't there, about being to say that I've input all the data, and out of that I can say it's this much better than what I was doing before.
Yeah.
I'm this much closer to the end goal. But as you say, when you're talking about, there are some things you can measure, and I'm sure, you know, circular economy measurement tools are getting more and more sophisticated. But
you see this? This is made by some fantastically interested metal woodworkers and so on in 1978 in Britain. They didn't get metrics on it. They decided, can we build a really, really good bass guitar and sell it? Let's find out how to do that. You know, that's the difference. This has got huge quality. You don't get quality just by metrics.
So they had a vision. They knew
what they had a vision, and they carried it out, and then they check it out with the metrics. But I expected they didn't, actually. But they thought, hey, people love this. We really got onto something. And it's that, I've been reading a lot about the architect, Christopher Alexander. It's well worth looking up, pattern language. He talks about equality without a name. Some things are just right. And that's what we resonate with. We want things to be, oh yeah, I get that, that's good. Then we can figure out some way of tuning it up in terms of metrics. Anyway, enough on the metrics.
We've got a very important question for you, Ken. What
And
make is your guitar?
Yeah.
What make, oh, it's a Wall, W-A-L. Wall bass, check it out, because a lot of famous people use that, including Paul McCartney. A lot of the session players. So it's Wall, it's still made in Britain.
So we have 3 minutes left. And okay. So the final comment or the final thing you'd like to leave our audience with?
Well, we've been talking about systems, and people don't, the final thing I'd like to leave you with is check out Boids, B-O-I-D-S. It's a simulation about birds, and you notice the bird's behavior on this simulation changes with very small changes in the system conditions. That tells you how important system conditions are. Instead of wondering where all of these digital birds are going, you just change a little condition and watch it iterate. So people miss that. They get into the detail and forget the schema. And that's what I'd like to leave you with. So start talking more about what would be the system conditions that would generate the sort of world we want to move towards.
What would be the system conditions to generate the world we want to live in? Thank you, Ken. It's been an absolutely incredible discussion. I feel like my mind is so full of new ideas. And this is the wrap up of the webinar 4. And Seb,
thank you very much, Ken. Even I learned a couple of things from this session.
Oh, wow, Seb, I'm honored.
Great. So that's week 4 done, Ilma. I don't really know where we are in the script, to be honest.
Well, okay, so there are 2 things we have to say. One is about all the announcements and the double webinars, but I think we'll just post it in the Slack, and we already showed you the slide with the new dates at the beginning. And one piece to tell you is the homework. So the homework for today is to reflect how your perception of circular economy has shifted since the beginning of the series. And please post your thoughts in 1 paragraph in week 4 channel on Slack. And we will be repeating this homework on Slack as well. And as always, go back together with your learning trio and just reflect on what you heard in the webinar today. And I'm sure there will be a lot of things to reflect upon. And the recording and the slides will be available.
And
oh
yeah, go on, Ken.
Just want to say goodbye, and thanks for all the input. You know, don't forget is4ce.org. I just wanted to bring that up.
Share the link. We can share the link to that as well.
Yeah. All right then.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you very much.
On that homework, everyone who's watching, I don't want you to go for really general things like, oh, I'm so excited about circular economy, or, oh, my understanding's increased. Try and get specific with us and reflect on some of the content that we've been diving into over the last 4 weeks. But that's all for this session. And next week, you've got the choices, which we've already shared.
Well, actually, you can
you
can
go
attend both. It's what is it? It's Plastics and the City. Plastics on Wednesday and City on Friday. And the final thing I want to say, what Ken said, we're all agents for change, and it really struck with me. And having this diverse cohort of people, it's all up to us to start affecting the system from where we are. Thank you, and see you
next
all
week.
next week.